I remember the first time I noticed her, though I'd passed by her desk dozens of times before without really seeing. That morning, the repair shop smelled like hot metal and coffee, the kind of bitter mix that sticks to your shirt and your skin. I was supposed to be fixing a faulty coffee machine for one of the clients upstairs, fumbling with wires and screws, when I heard a soft sigh behind me. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, a half-smile playing at the corner of her mouth, as if she knew something I didn't. Mid-40s, I'd guess, with streaks of silver through her dark hair that caught the fluorescent light in a way that almost made me flinch. She wasn't smiling at me, not really, but the faint lift of her cheek, the way she shifted her weight, made me want to look closer. I did, and immediately felt like I'd crossed a line. "Don't look at me," she said, sharp enough to make me jerk upright, but soft enough to feel like a tease. I laughed, though it came out a little too loud, like I'd swallowed a cough. "Then, close my eyes for me," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could even think if they made sense. She raised an eyebrow, that half-smile widening just enough to tease me. There was a pause, just a few seconds, but long enough that I realized I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the scraping of a wrench against the counter, even the faint tapping of her polished nails on the wood. I couldn't tell if she was annoyed, amused, or just tolerating my stupidity, but there was electricity in that silence, a kind that doesn't announce itself with sparks, but with a quiet insistence that lingers in your chest. Her name is Marissa. I didn't know it then. All I knew was that she moved through the repair shop like she owned every corner without trying, the way someone does when they've been here long enough to know every crack in the floor, every smell, every person. She had this way of noticing things, the way the loose screw on the coffee machine trembled under my fingers, the way the strap of my backpack kept slipping off my shoulder, and yet, she didn't correct me, didn't talk down to me. She just watched. She leaned closer to inspect the machine, her perfume faint but distinct, a mixture of citrus and something musky I couldn't place. My hands itched to do something right, anything, but I kept fumbling. She didn't reach out, didn't touch the wires, just tilted her head, and I realized I was holding my breath. "You need a coffee, or do you just enjoy struggling?" she asked, voice low, teasing, but there was no mockery in it. Only observation. Maybe both," I said, scratching the back of my neck. She laughed softly, shaking her head, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes met mine. Not a glance, not a look, but something heavier, like she saw me, really saw me, in a way I wasn't used to. Then she turned away, scanning the shelves for a new tool, leaving me staring at her back, trying not to memorize the curve of her shoulders, the way her jacket fell just right, the rhythm of her steps. My chest tightened, a sudden, inexplicable ache that had nothing to do with coffee or broken machines. I left the shop later that day with a repaired coffee machine in my bag and a single, unspeakable thought lodged in my head. That moment, her smile, that pause, the way she let me look without permission, was something I couldn't stop replaying. Something I would chase, unknowingly, for a long time. And the thing is, I don't think she had any idea. I didn't plan to see her again so soon. But there she was the next afternoon, crouched near a stack of old filing cabinets at the back of the shop. I'd come to return a tool I'd borrowed, and the fluorescent lights made her hair glint like copper in places I hadn't noticed before. "Thanks for this," she muttered, barely looking up. Her voice was calm, even flat, but there was a tremor in the way she said it. I noticed the way her fingers lingered over the edge of a drawer before pulling it open, the way her shoulders stiffened when the metal scraped the floor. Small things, meaningless to anyone else, but to me they meant everything. Don't mention it," I said, leaning against the doorway. "Need a hand." My own hands were clumsy, awkwardly shoved into my pockets. She glanced at me, one sharp eye, before shaking her head. "No, I've got it." She said it like she meant it, but then her hand slipped slightly, brushing the corner of a cabinet. She caught herself quickly, but I caught the pause, the slight wince. I wanted to step forward, to reach out, but I stayed still. Sometimes just standing there, silently observing, felt like enough. She moved with a precise efficiency, but I noticed the subtle tells of exhaustion, the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her laugh, when it came, was half-hearted, as if she was testing it against some invisible barrier. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I just watched her, letting the quiet between us stretch. When she finally straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, our eyes met. She didn't look away, not immediately. There was a hesitation in her gaze, like she was deciding whether to keep me out or let me in. I couldn't tell what she wanted or what she was trying to hide. Careful with that, I said softly, nodding at the cabinet she was moving. She gave a brief, almost imperceptible smile. I know what I'm doing, she said, but it wasn't quite a challenge. More like reassurance, to herself as much as to me. Her hands lingered on the edge of the metal for a moment longer than necessary, fingers brushing against each other in a small, nervous gesture. I noticed everything. Every tiny movement, every shadow behind her eyes, every fragment of laughter that didn't quite reach her voice. For a heartbeat, I imagined leaning closer, letting my hand cover hers. Not to touch the cabinet, not to fix it, but just to be there. Safe. Seen. Something unspoken hummed between us, thick and fragile, like a wire charged with energy neither of us wanted to name. She finally let the cabinet fall into place with a soft thud and turned to face me. Our eyes met again, longer this time, and in that shared silence, something shifted. Not words, not confessions, not promises. Just recognition. A gentle pull, a current I could feel in my chest and hands, subtle yet impossible to ignore. I didn't move, and she didn't speak. And maybe that was the point. Sometimes the quiet holds more than anything said aloud. And yet, I knew even then, as she straightened and walked past me toward the door, that the moment wouldn't leave me. I'd carry it with me, the tiny shift in her posture, the half-smile, the way her presence lingered in the space long after she'd gone. The storm had started just after closing time. Rain pounded against the shop windows, a steady drum that made the hum of the fluorescent lights feel small and fragile. I was supposed to be locking up, but Marissa was still sorting through paperwork at her desk, sleeves rolled up, the gold of her bracelet catching the flicker of the overhead light. "Did you bring an umbrella?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No," she said, not looking up. Her voice was soft, tired, just enough to let me hear the edge of vulnerability beneath the usual composure. I stepped closer, instinctively, though I kept my hands in my pockets. The space between us felt charged, small, but dense. Her hair fell forward, brushing her cheek as she leaned over the stack of papers, and I wanted to reach out, tuck it back behind her ear, but I didn't. I stayed still, silent, letting her set the pace. "You know," I started, then stopped. My words always seemed to stall around her. Maybe it was the way her eyes held me without needing to, or maybe it was the storm, the quiet, the way the world outside had shrunk to the size of this room. A phone buzzed on her desk. She picked it up quickly, a flash of annoyance crossing her face before she smiled politely at the voice on the other end. I could see the faint tension in her jaw, the way her fingers drummed against the table as if the conversation was a test she didn't want to fail. A friend, an ex, whoever it was. It reminded me that our proximity had rules I couldn't break, boundaries I couldn't cross. I looked away for a moment, watching the rain trace streaks down the window. When I turned back, she had finished the call and leaned back in her chair, eyes meeting mine, unguarded for just a fraction of a second. "Storm's getting worse," she said, almost like a statement of fact, but the weight in her tone suggested she wanted something more. Maybe company, maybe just acknowledgement. I didn't answer. My throat felt tight, a knot of something I couldn't name. I wanted to say, "Stay," or "I'll wait with you," but instead I just nodded, letting my gaze linger on her hands. Long, delicate fingers now wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, the steam rising slowly, obscuring her lips. We didn't speak again. The storm filled the silence with its own sound, every drop a reminder that we were alone, and yet not. She shifted in her chair, and in the act, our knees brushed. A fleeting contact, barely noticeable, but enough to make my chest thrum. I felt her glance downward, then quickly back at me, and in that heartbeat, I imagined reaching for her hand, brushing my fingers against hers, letting the storm outside be the only witness. My pulse surged. I could feel the hesitation in her body, the same tight pull I felt in my own, a magnetic tension neither of us dared name. Then, as if the world demanded its boundaries, she straightened fully, pushing the chair back. The moment collapsed like a wave retreating from the shore. My hand hovered, inches from hers, but didn't move. And I realized that sometimes, the almost moment, the near touch, the shared secret, the unspoken words, was heavier than anything we could actually say or do. I left that night with wet shoes, a heart thudding, and a single, stubborn thought lodged in my chest. What if next time, I don't hold back? I found her in the back room again, this time leaning against the half-open door of the storeroom, a clipboard in hand that she wasn't really looking at. The rain from yesterday had left the air damp, almost electric, and the faint smell of wet cement and old paper clung to everything. I didn't know what compelled me to speak first. Maybe it was the quiet, the way the fluorescent light made her hair look almost red in some places, or the way she seemed to shrink into herself as she read through her notes. Do you ever? I don't know, I started, my voice catching. Do you ever feel like none of this makes sense? She glanced up, finally meeting my eyes, and I saw it. The flicker of tension in her jaw, the tightening around her eyes, the faint tremor of her hand on the clipboard. What do you mean? She asked softly, almost guarded, but not fully. I took a hesitant step closer, then stopped. I mean us. This. I don't know what it is we're doing here, day after day, standing like strangers, but somehow not. And my voice faltered. My chest felt like it was being squeezed from the inside. She didn't respond right away. She set the clipboard down, leaned against the edge of the counter, and sighed, a sound heavy with exhaustion, maybe from work, maybe from something else. Her eyes were fixed somewhere just above my shoulder, distant, and I felt a pang, realizing she had the same words on the tip of her tongue, maybe, but couldn't say them. I don't know either, she finally said, low, almost a whisper. Her arms crossed over her chest, and I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. And I don't think we're supposed to know. The silence stretched. Not awkward, not empty, but weighted, thick with everything we weren't saying. Every glance, every hesitation, every small, private heartbeat we shared in the quiet. I wanted to reach out, to fill the space between us, but I stayed frozen. My hands itched, my chest ached, my head spun with all the possibilities I couldn't name. Instead, I let my gaze linger on her face, the line of her jaw, the way her lips pressed together, the shadow under her eyes that betrayed her fatigue. What if we're just, I trailed off, unable to form the words. What if we're just pretending? Her head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and she laughed softly, not humorously, but as if trying to shake off the gravity of the question. Pretending's easier, she said, voice thin. It hurts less that way. I swallowed. My fingers itched toward her shoulder, toward her hand, toward anything that could make the ache in my chest stop. But I didn't move. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, it felt like she was trying to peel back every layer I'd ever had, the way people look when they're desperate for truth. And maybe, she whispered finally, voice breaking slightly, maybe I can't stop feeling it anyway. The words landed like a stone in my chest. They weren't confessions of love, not yet, but they were everything. Vulnerability, fear, longing, and confusion wrapped into a single, quiet truth that neither of us could undo. I wanted to say something back, but the only thing I could manage was to step closer, closer than before, feeling the warmth radiating from her without touching, knowing in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. And then she said it, almost too quietly for the room itself to hear. I don't know if I should be here, or if I should run. I was stacking boxes near the back corner when I heard the soft click of her heels on the concrete. She didn't usually come back here unless she wanted privacy, or so I thought. You ever regret things? She asked suddenly, voice low, almost hesitant. I froze mid-lift, letting the box settle back on the stack, and turned toward her. What kind of things? I asked carefully, unsure if I wanted the answer. The ones that hurt someone, or hurt yourself, or just went wrong, she said, twisting a ring on her finger. Her gaze fell to the floor, and I noticed how the fluorescent light made the faint lines around her eyes seem sharper than usual. I stepped closer but kept my distance. Yeah, I said softly. I've had a few of those. She exhaled slowly, almost like she was letting a secret out to the dust motes in the air. I lost someone a long time ago, she whispered, her voice barely more than a threat. Not just anyone. Someone I thought I'd have forever. And I never really forgave myself. I wanted to reach out, but I stayed frozen, watching her. The pause stretched, filled with all the things we didn't say. Finally, she pulled something from her desk drawer, a photograph, faded at the edges, showing a younger version of herself with a man I didn't recognize. She held it out to me, and I took it gently, careful not to break the fragile paper. I don't even know why I'm showing you this, she said, voice shaking slightly. Maybe because it's easier to hold it out than to carry it alone. I studied the picture, noticing the curve of her smile, the way her hand rested against his shoulder, the eyes that seemed to carry years of longing. Hey, meant a lot to you, I said quietly. She nodded, biting her lip. Everything. And I ruined it. Her voice caught at the last word. I didn't know what to say. Nothing I could say could fix the past, and yet, watching her now, I realized that the weight she carried wasn't just about someone lost. It was about her, about the person she had to become afterward, about the caution she wore like armor. I began, then stopped. I wanted to say I understand, but I didn't. How could I? Instead, I just held the photograph, letting my fingers trace the edges, letting her watch me without saying a word. Her gaze flicked up at me, and I saw it, the tiniest shift in her posture, a crack in the wall she'd built so carefully. You don't have to say anything, she said. You just look. And so I did. I looked. At her, at the picture, at the quiet line of sorrow she carried like a shadow behind her smile. My chest tightened, my hands trembled slightly, not with grief, not with desire, but with the raw, unfiltered awareness of how deeply someone could feel and still survive. She finally turned away, resting her forehead against the edge of the counter, and whispered, almost to herself, I didn't think I'd ever let anyone see that side of me. Not again. The words hung in the air, a quiet tremor that shook everything I thought I knew about her and about us. I wanted to reach out, to brush a hand against hers, but instead, I stayed still, letting the storm inside both of us simmer in silence. And in that pause, I realized, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The shop was quiet that evening, quieter than usual. Most of the clients had gone, the hum of machines and distant traffic reduced to a soft background murmur. I found her sitting on the edge of the counter, legs dangling, eyes tracing the lines of a sketch she'd abandoned half-finished. The soft light made her hair glow faintly at the tips. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt or just exist nearby. She looked up, and for a brief moment, the weight of unspoken words hung between us like a fragile bridge. You stayed, she said, almost a statement, not a question. I didn't want to leave. I replied simply, voice low. It was the truth. Nothing grand, nothing scripted, just the plain fact. She nodded, as if that explained everything and nothing all at once. Her hands folded loosely in her lap, fingers brushing against each other. I noticed the faint tremor, the tension in her shoulders that had always been there, just beneath the surface. I moved closer, careful, slow. There was no urgency, only the quiet acknowledgement that we had reached a point where distance felt impossible. I lowered myself onto the stool beside her, letting the gap between us shrink until it was just a breath, just the faintest space for comfort and choice. We didn't speak. Words felt heavy, unnecessary. Instead, I watched her hands, the way they fidgeted with the edge of the counter, the faint scar on one knuckle, the tiny ritual she didn't even notice she did. She glanced at me, lips parted slightly, eyes questioning without asking. I could feel the subtle pull, the weight of all the small moments, the laughter, the silences, the brushes of fingers near each other that had carried more than words ever could. Slowly, almost instinctively, my hand moved. Just a trace, resting lightly against hers. No pressure, no demand. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers twitched, hesitant, and then she let them settle against mine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. But it was everything. The tension, the fear, the past heartbreaks, the quiet pull of something neither of us had been able to name. All of it condensed into that small, impossibly simple gesture. She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, I saw her exhale in a way that wasn't restrained, wasn't measured. She let herself exist in the moment. And I mirrored it, feeling the same fragile relief that comes from recognition and permission. The shop hummed softly around us, indifferent, allowing the world to shrink until it contained only the two of us. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. After a long pause, she leaned just slightly, a whisper of motion, against the edge of my shoulder. Not heavy, not demanding, but enough. Enough to seal the truth we'd been circling for weeks. That this, here and now, was inevitable. I rested my head lightly near hers, letting the quiet space carry the weight of acknowledgement. No declarations, no promises, just the raw, human understanding that had taken months to reach. And in that silence, in the stillness of shared breath and small touches, I knew everything had shifted. Not with a rush, not with fireworks, but with a certainty that would stay, quietly, if we let it. She didn't speak. I didn't speak. We just stayed. And somehow that was enough. I think about that night a lot. Not because anything dramatic happened, not because there were fireworks or confessions, but because it was quiet, and quiet, I've realized, carries more weight than we often notice. We didn't change overnight. She's still precise, still guarded in the ways that make her her. And I'm still fumbling, still overthinking, still tripping over the space between what I feel and what I say. But somewhere along the way, the distance between us shrank. Not in leaps or bounds, but in small, nearly imperceptible ways, shared glances, laughter that doesn't feel forced, moments of silence that don't feel empty. I remember walking into the shop one rainy afternoon and catching her fingers brushing against mine over a toolbox. The briefest touch, accidental maybe, but it lingered in my chest longer than any words could. That was the first time I understood that love isn't always a declaration. Sometimes it's the quiet certainty that you'll show up, that you'll notice, that you'll stay, even when it's messy or complicated. She's taught me a lot about patience, about restraint, about holding someone's history in your hands gently, without trying to fix it, without demanding it change. And maybe more than anything, she's taught me that closeness isn't about grand gestures. It's about recognizing the invisible threads between two people and letting them grow, quietly, without breaking. For her, I think the world feels smaller now, though I don't know if she'd admit it. Maybe she feels that subtle shift too. The way someone finally sees the small parts of her she usually hides. The way someone waits instead of rushing. I hope she does. I hope she knows that what we have isn't perfect, isn't easy, but it's real. We still have our boundaries. We still have our moments of awkward silence, the long pauses when words fail, the glances that speak volumes without anything being said. But I don't mind. I've learned that these things, the pauses, the hesitations, the near touches that feel monumental, are the marrow of connection. I think love looks different when you're older, when you've carried loss or regret or longing for a long time. It's quieter, harder to name, easier to overlook if you're not paying attention. But it's still there. And sometimes, it's enough to just sit beside someone in silence. Let your hands brush. Let the world keep spinning around you. And feel that pulse of recognition. That moment where everything shifts and nothing else matters. I don't know where we'll be a year from now. Maybe we'll be working side by side here, laughing over coffee, arguing over tools. Maybe life will demand we step back for a while. But what I do know is this. I've learned that real connection isn't about certainty or timing. It's about showing up, noticing, and letting the small, impossible things between two people grow quietly, patiently, inevitably. And every time I see her now, Every time our fingers brush over some mundane task, I remember that first spark in the repair shop, and I can't help but smile. If you've ever felt a connection too quiet to name, or a moment too small to forget, maybe you understand what I mean.